whoever's in charge of the local, the business agents or whoever.
We're okay now?
Whenever you guys are ready.
So, we're gonna try and simplify things as much as we can. This is not inside baseball for people that understand unionism. You will have to kind of explain things as we go along. And again, we can repeat things as much as we need to, you know. But we'll start off, think about it, you know, before the union came in. Start with that.
Okay, before the union came in, the conditions of the jail were deplorable. I mean, they could send you home without cause and not call you back until they were ready for you to come back. They could change your shift, day off, and division you worked in a moment's notice. I myself had my shift and day off group changed by a phone call at 2 o'clock in the morning. I was called by a lieutenant and told not to come in tomorrow night, that I'd be on day shift the following morning. I didn't ask for a shift change or a group change, but before we had the Teamsters representing us, that's what they did. My starting pay was only $16,600 a year when I started in 1982. I was taking home roughly $480 and some change every 2 weeks. That wasn't a lot of money, even in 1982 times. It wasn't a lot of money to get by on, but I did. I managed. And
The daily conditions at what was it like to work?
going into the jail, sometimes we had to fight our way in and fight our way out. I mean, I worked in Division 5 in 1982 and 83, all the way until 87, actually. And we would have, the housing was 40 inmates in a cell, 2 inmates to a cell, and we'd have 40 inmates to a tier. And most times, most days, we had 40 inmates in the cell, and anywhere from 30 to 40 sleeping in the day room floor without uniforms. They were wearing their civilian clothes, and so you didn't know who was who, really. I mean, if anybody, walked in there, a visitor or somebody walked in there, you wouldn't know if they were an inmate or not.
And what were some of the things, the incidents that were occurring at that time?
Oh, officers would be attacked every once in a while. I've been attacked a couple of times in the early days, and they didn't charge inmates. The department just says, well, that's a hazard of the job, which it's not a hazard of the job. And the Teamsters said that. It's not a hazard of the job. It's not. This is something the inmates should be charged with. It's an assault. Prior to 1983, we didn't have the right to have a union represent us to bargain collectively for hours, wages, or conditions of employment. Not until the Public Sector Act of 1983. When that passed in the state of Illinois, the Chicago Police Department and Fire Department, they organized right away. It took us a couple of years longer because we had to go to court and fight with the sheriff and fight with the county board to get the right for to have a union representative for collective bargaining purposes. When that happened, when they finally agreed to it and the court ordered it, then the Teamsters were in an election along with the Combined Counties Police Association, who were really just a credit union kind of based organization. FOP was in there, but they really never represented us. They couldn't ask for raises. They couldn't represent us for grievance procedures. We didn't have a grievance procedure at all. We had no right for a grievance procedure or hearing. Whatever the department wanted to suspend us if we had a rule infraction, they just gave us a suspension for anywhere from 3 to 29 days. And there was no arguing over it. We had no one to represent us.
So when the union came in,
when Bill Hogan came in with the Teamsters, the very first thing they did before we even had a contract was the department used to call us twice a shift to make sure we were home when we called in medical. If you didn't answer the phone, you got docked for the day. So the first thing the Teamsters did is they took that department to court and they filed an injunction and they won it. the department could no longer call us at home to check to see if we were there or not. When we called in medical, they just had to take us at our word that we were at home. And that was one of the greatest things that I'd seen the Teamsters do. I'm like, wow, that's pretty impressive, you know. And then it took roughly 2.5, maybe 3 years to negotiate the very first contract. The issue, because you're negotiating with joint employers, the county board and the sheriff. The sheriff represents the rules, and the county board represents the money. And they just didn't want to give us a raise, and we had to negotiate over that. And one of the main things the sheriff's department did is that they wanted to maintain the right to put us in the division where they wanted us to work. They wanted to make sure they wanted to give us the shift that they wanted us to have, and they wanted to have a day off group that they wanted us to be on. And Bill and the Teamsters, they says, no, these officers have the right to be able to choose their division, their day off group, and their divisions. And the director, you know, at the time, Phil Hardiman, leaned back in his chair and started laughing. Well, our business agent, I believe his name was Marshall Arrington at the time, and I wasn't present for this, but I had heard the story that Marshall reached across the desk and grabbed the director by his tie and said, I don't see anything funny about this. These are people's lives that you're laughing at. It's their livelihood. It's their families. You're laughing at them. There's nothing funny about that. They have the right to choose their day off group. They have a right to choose their shift. And he let them go. And I heard Bill was kind of a little nervous. Him and Jim were a little nervous because they were present, and they were worried about getting out of there because they were inside the jail when they were negotiating this. And they wanted to make sure they got back outside the gate to go home. But after that meeting, we were given the right. They finally signed the contract and gave us the right to choose. And like I said, I think that was 1985 or 86. And we had the very first bid to choose our division, our shift, and the day off group.
So you went from the time that the union came in, tell me the difference in the wages from when you came in.
Oh, the wages jumped from, the starting pay jumped from $16,600 a year to roughly, I think, $19,000 to start, or 20. And the pay kept continually go up. I think starting pay now is like $48,000 a year. It's just continued to grow.
That wouldn't have happened without.
No, it wouldn't have happened without the Teamsters. The contract the officers are working under today was written by Bill Hogan and Jim Hogan and the group that negotiated the first contract. And that has stood the test of time. That language is so solid that they haven't had to change it since the very first contract. And these officers, I don't think really appreciate that. I mean, I've always appreciated that. Every time I pick up a contract today and look at it, I see those very first words that were written at the time the Teamsters came to the jail. And those words have stood the test of time. You know.
You said before we started filming here that in the beginning there was a lack of dignity.
Yeah, I mean, the supervisors would talk to you any kind of way they wanted to. You had no protection, none whatsoever. You had no one to turn to make a complaint. You could write a complaint to the director, but it just fell on deaf ears. You know, we had no ability to file grievances. There was no such thing as a grievance procedure, no such thing as a hearing procedure of any sort. And that takes away a person's dignity. When you're told to do, keep your mouth shut and do what you're told, and have to live like that. I mean, this is not the military. I mean, the military might be a little different, but this is a job, and the inmates, we were treated just like the inmates were treated. We ate the same food they ate it every day, and we were given 40-minute lunch breaks. You couldn't even leave the jail to go to lunch because you had to be back in 40 minutes. I mean, where could you go and come? And there was really nothing much open on midnights to go to start with. It was 20 minutes away and eat and come back in 20 minutes.
So, I'd like to lay out for people what it means that they're bringing back, or since the union left, now they can call. Tell them
Well,
what they can do.
when they put the local in receivership, they parceled out the local. They really split us up. The trustee at the time, I think his name was Bill Logan. He actually told me to my face that this is not. You're not going to notice. It's not going to be the same local 714 that you're used to. 714 that you know is going to be gone. And they proceeded to split our local up. They sent workers that, because at that time we had local 714 covered pharmacists, it covered corrections, it covered steel workers, it covered dock handlers, it covered the movie industry. They split us all up. They put the corrections in with the public sector employees.
What did that mean in terms of your strength and
Oh,
their
I was always taught you could break one stick. Take one stick and you could snap it in half. Take a string, you could snap it. But when you have a solid local, now you have a fist. You can't break something like this. But they did. When they split us up and separated us, it just weakened our local to no end. Administration tried, the last negotiating committee I was on, they introduced a 3-hour call-in medical. You had to call in 3 hours prior to the start of your shift, and they wanted to do home checks, and that didn't sit well with me. I told their attorney, he can go screw himself, and no uncertain terms. And he says, well, what do you can't talk to me like that. I said, yeah, sure I can. So let me tell you something. I said, the Teamsters put a stop to this 30 years ago of checking our houses to see if we were home. And now you want to reintroduce it? No, it's not going to happen. And we had enough veteran officers on the negotiating committee that sided with me, in spite of our business agent and in spite of our chief steward at the time with Local 700. They said, oh, the department has no way of doing this. And I told them, I said, let me tell you something. I've been around the block a few times. I said, if they didn't have a way of doing it, they wouldn't introduce it.
Yeah.
So what they did is they waited until us old timers left, and they reintroduced it this about a year ago. And the administration was all for it, and they pushed it through, and they...
Tell us how onerous this is for people.
Oh, it's terrible for these officers, because if you have a lot of single officers, female single officers who are raising their children, and if they have to get up in the morning, they get up and get ready for work, and then they get their children up to take them to a babysitter or whoever, and if their child says, I'm sick, what do? They had to call in 2 hours ago. I'm sorry. They would have had to call in.
We're going to go over that again.
Okay, let me turn this phone off.
Go ahead and do what you gotta do. I'm gonna go ahead and readjust this slightly. It's sounding and looking awesome. by
We
the
got
way.
good stuff here. This is really going
Yeah.
well. I don't think we need a whole lot more here.
Yeah, we're doing well. Give me like 2 more seconds.
Yeah,
and
it's all right.
Go ahead and smile real quick.
All right.
There you go. You guys are all good.
So you were starting to tell us about the female officer, or how this affected them.
It affects the female officers because they count on this job to raise their families. They didn't come here to look for men, but they count on this job. It's a good paying job, good benefits, thanks to the Teamsters, because they wrote those benefits in 30 years ago. Our lunch hours. We went from 40-minute lunch hours to an hour. They wrote in better health care, better health insurance at very low cost. I mean, for years, I didn't pay anything for health insurance. I had 2 children, or 3 children actually, and didn't pay a dime at the hospital. That's how good our insurance was we had through the Teamsters. And we didn't have that type of insurance when I started. So we had better insurance benefits. We had they help us increase our pension benefits. I was able to retire after 30. you had to work 33 years, 4 months to get a full pension of 80%. I did 34, almost 34 years. I was 1 month shy when I retired in 2016. But I was 57 years old. And I'm getting 80% of my pay with a 3% increase every year for the rest of my life.
So you understood, tell us, you understood what it meant when the local was being decertified.
When it was decertified and they split us up, it's like that line in the movie, you just weakened the nation. Well, they just weakened our local when they split us up because we didn't have 13,000 members anymore or 14,000 members. Now we only had like a few thousand members. So when you only have a few thousand members, you don't have a large voice as you would with 14, 15,000. And so that weakens us. And when it weakened us, the department was able to come in and change that call-in time. And these poor female officers, they have to get their children up. Well, the child doesn't get up 3 hours early and say, I'm sick. When they wake that child up to get ready to go to the sitters, that child might be sick, have a 100-degree temperature, not feeling well. Now, what's the mom to do? She calls in medical and she gets docked for a day because she didn't call in 3 hours prior to the start of her shift. Then they come to your house. 2 o'clock in the morning, they come and bang. I had a friend of mine. He took an FMLA day. Now, FMLA at the jail, he was able to use a personal day. So they took FMLA hours, 8 hours of FMLA from him. So he had to give up 8 hours.
What is FMLA?
FMLA stands for Family Medical Leave Act. And it's a federal act that allows you to take time away from your employer without being docked or, costing you money. But he was able to use a personal day. So he still got paid for the day. So it was like he was, there. Well, they come to his house at 2 o'clock in the morning and they banged on his door so hard, it woke up his neighbor next door. They thought there was something going on. And he gets up and he comes to the door and he says, oh, you're home. And he goes, where else would I be? And they go, well, we have to do our check. And he goes, but I called an FMLA. He said, well, what's the difference? And he just walked away. It was a lieutenant and a sergeant. That's not right. I told him, I said, you should file a grievance on that. And he really doesn't know how to file a grievance himself. And I said, well, I was retired. I said, I can help you file your grievance. He goes, I'm going to retire in a couple of months. I'll just let it go. And I told him, I said, that's the wrong attitude. File your grievance. Speak out. You have to speak out. Not for yourself, but for the next guy. That's what being union is about. You're not speaking for yourself. You're speaking for everyone.
Nicely put. My last question is, tell me about that house that you bought and what the guy told you.
Oh, this house here. My credit wasn't very good. When I applied for a home loan through Union Services in I believe it was 1999. And my wife thought, she goes, oh, that's impossible. Our credit's kind of bad because I was married before and I was left in debt by my ex-wife, my late ex-wife, actually now. She passed away a few years ago. But I says, well, I got to do it. So I applied and I get a call from this man named Bob Brandel, who was the senior loan officer with First Home Mortgage. He says, well, could I come to your house? And I said, sure. I give him my address. And he drove from Homewood, Illinois, which is south of where I live now in Evergreen Park, to the north side. I lived up on Eddy Street, which is one street south of Addison.
Well, let's start that over without talking about all the streets.
Okay.
He
came to my house, and
the loan officer.
The loan officer, his name was Bob Brandel. He was the senior loan officer with First Home Mortgage. He came to my house, and when he sat down with my wife and I at the dining room table, the first things out of his mouth were, Mr. Hogan has instructed me to do whatever I can to help you purchase a home. And I looked at my wife, and she looked at me. I'm like, wow, that's pretty good, I mean, I didn't know Bill anything. I was a loyal Teamster. I worked for my members. I was a good union steward. I worked hard for my members. And I think Bill recognized this. And I didn't keep my mouth shut with the department. I was always speaking out, looking for something better. I defended people who couldn't or wouldn't or didn't know how to defend themselves. That's what I did. And I was very good at it.
That's enough. We got good stuff here.
Cool.
That's the essence of unionism.
Yeah.
That's what we want to talk. We only have a few minutes